Welcome, data people. We are Zuma. My name is Matt, and this is the Data for Good podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Zuma. Zuma is a dedicated recruitment company focusing on data positions across Berlin. The Data for Good podcast is for the world of data science, analytics, and engineering, giving you a platform to the thoughts and opinions of data leaders from Berlin and beyond. Today, we are joined by Ishaan Varshney, Head of Engineering at SellerX. Ishaan, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to have you on. So, first off, can you give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ishaan. I'm head of engineering at SellerX. Quick background about me. What brought me here was I studied computer science as an undergrad, or actually did computer science and economics. And I thought I was going to be an economist, but turns out it's much easier to get a job as a programmer, or was, at the time, than being an economist. And then, I was in programming, worked in places where there were a lot of statistics, statistical models. Which inspired me to go back to university, get a master's in artificial intelligence. And since then, I've always worked in the sort of intersection between software engineering and machine learning. And what brings me to this moment. So, like, in terms of my background, like, I was born in India, but I grew up in Australia, and I've been in Berlin for the last 4 years, which is where SellerX is.
Nice. And SellerX, for those who aren't aware, most will, but SellerX, what are they about?
Yeah, so SellerX is a very interesting company, especially when you look at it from an engineering point of view, but I guess we'll get to that. SellerX is a e-commerce aggregator.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that it allows people who sell things on places like Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
You can sell your business to SellerX, and
Right.
we manage it from then on. So we have a bunch of tools that allow us to scale businesses to several marketplaces, both in terms of capital and also in terms of software.
So they focus on the products, you focus on the business, help them grow.
Yeah, exactly.
Onwards and upwards. Awesome. Well, today we're here to talk about quite a hot topic, interesting topic. We've shared a few discussions already on this area. We're going to talk automation, ChatGPT, LLMs. So you're quite an advocate for this area. You've seen a lot of results in the increase in productivity. So tell us a bit more about what you've seen so far.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe I think so. Let's focus on software, because that's a use case that I just feel most comfortable with in terms of understanding and seeing the whole host of issues there. So I mean, I like to see the art of like creating software in like two sort of buckets.
Right.
There's one side that's designing systems, and another side which is just translating business logic into code.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if, for example, if someone says, I'd like to have a button for my website for checkout. So that's business logic, and now you need to convert it into code to make it happen. And I think that's where those are the kind of problems ChatGPT is very good at.
Mm-hmm.
If you provide it the questions, or you formulate the questions and the context in the appropriate way. So I think that's very important.
So it sounds like it's the kind of basic tasks that aren't really requiring creativity, more functionality, that it comes into its own.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I wouldn't call them simple, but the bit I would agree with you is that the tasks that no software engineer, I think, really enjoys doing. I think we all find ways to find the joy in it, or I think more often find ways to like split hairs, because I think that's some of the things like, we should do things this way and not that way, and this is how us we as software engineers keep ourselves entertained. It's like this works better, that works better, because the actual, I think no one enjoys the task of just like converting business logic into code, which I think is more like the work I think a translator does. Whereas on the other side of software engineering, you have really interesting problems about how things scale, in different conditions, or how systems talk to each other, for example. Like that's the other side where ChatGPT can't help us. But I think on the side of translating business problems, yes, they can be simple, but sometimes it's really just a matter of breaking the problem down to one or two decisions, ideally one. So like we have this term internally inside of SellerX. We call it a one-step problem, that the decision making that's required from ChatGPT needs to be one small jump, and then it just gives you the output. So, for example, let's say you've written a Python script that gets data from one endpoint, right?
Yeah.
And let's say you have like 2 or 3 different examples. Well, what you can give ChatGPT is you can say, look, here's the documentation of this new endpoint that we haven't implemented.
Right.
And here's the examples of previous implementations that we've done for that endpoint. So the only jump it needs to make is like, okay, so this is the documentation for the new endpoint, and these are the previous examples. So what it's able to do is it gives you code that is compliant to how you do it, uses the same libraries that you do it, because it's previous examples. And the only jump it needs to make is just go, okay, I need to convert what this documentation says into the way SellerX engineering does their like code integration, or whatever you want to call it, like basically data from that API. And then it outputs the result, and off you go. So like we like to see them as one-step problems versus like simple problems.
Is the documentation and the hard foundational work done previously, is that where this could become a challenge and it can create wrong processes?
So I mean the documentation from the actual API that you're consuming, right? So so that isn't, but yeah, the fact that you bring documentation, it's actually a central tenet in how you automate these processes. So what I just described to you, this process of like, okay, so here's the new endpoint we want to implement. How do you grab the other instances, so the other files that are most similar, most relevant to the new thing you want to generate, and how do you grab the documentation for it? How to do that at scale in a programmatic way, that's the challenge, and documentation plays a big role in that. So I don't know if we want to take a step back here and walk through a little bit about how we specifically do data pipelines, because one of the things I mentioned previously is like SellerX is unique from an engineering perspective, in that it is that we have no external website. It is all data pipelines. So it's just really moving data from one place to another and transforming it, which, I mean, for me is a dream, because when things break, you have like a few more minutes than when you have a website, and then customers get a 400 or whatever. So one of the problems that we came across quite early in our journey when we were developing data pipelines is no one team has this. Well, I think it just becomes untenable to have one team go end to end with the data, to write the API integration that gets the data, chucks it in the data warehouse, goes from the data warehouse to the first layer of our data warehouse, does the transformations, further transformations with business logic, monitoring, and all the way to it. So you get the point. Like it's a giant pipeline. And I think it's just like not possible to have one team go end to end. Or rather, one person go end to end, right? Not one team. So we came up with a specific YAML definition that encapsulates the whole pipeline end to end, to a point where if you can write this documentation, it's really sort of documentation, that's how it started out. If you write this bit of documentation that this is data coming from Amazon that needs to be pulled at this frequency, is stored in this format, these are the columns that we expect from it, this is the metadata, and this is how we want it to be like deduplicated. So, you know, if we pull it many times, we only have this row that reaches the stakeholders.
Yeah.
You document all of it. Yeah, so if you can document all of that, we've had some very promising results with using this documentation as input. So we create a new pipeline that we haven't integrated. We get previous, you know, YAML files that look most similar and the associated output. So this YAML has, you know, this Python script, this DBT code, this, that. Have them as inputs, and then we're able to generate each part of that pipeline without having to type the whole thing out ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's becoming very interesting for us, is how can we really create these assistants. So we're creating AI assistants very specific for the SellerX use case.
Yeah.
Which essentially take out a lot of that manual labor that you need to type the things out when, you know, it's really just 1 or 2 step problems that you're doing over and over again.
Where's the ownership? Who's monitoring? Who's overseeing all of this?
Yeah, that's you're getting to the heart of some problems. So one of the values that we have inside SellerX engineering is that you should be able to go from an idea to a walking skeleton in the shortest amount of time. Like that is like a walking skeleton is like an MVP, right?
Yeah.
Or the ugliest version possible in the shortest amount of time. So that is one of our values. And because most of your lessons are learned in production, right? We can always debate ideas and you can split hairs again about what to do, but you have to build something, and only then you can really have an honest discussion with your team about whether it works or not, or whether it provides any value or not. So for a lot of what I've described, we're in this walking skeleton, this like idea stage, and it's got really promising results. And now it gets to the point of, okay, so we have, you know, these, let's call them tools or assistants that generate the code. For now, we've just taken the policy that at the end of the day, it's the engineer who's using these things. They're still completely responsible for the code. So much so that, you know, we've added warnings where we know specifically there's some fields that it just doesn't do well on. Like if you ask it to like tag something, like come up with names for what should be the relevant tags be, it's just not going to know because it doesn't have all the context that, you know, we do. So we add like warnings, like make sure that you double check this this value, and ultimately the ownership is with the person that is responsible for the task. It's just that this is a tool that, you know, makes them go whatever, maybe 2 times as fast. We don't know. We have to do some metrics on that one.
Sounds like you've had some tough lessons and to put these warnings in and learn the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in certain instances it's pretty obvious, right? Like I think if you play around with LLMs enough, you get an idea for how they work and how they think. So you can already spot which places it's gonna have troubles generating things that you want.
And after the first couple of trials, experimentations, a little bit further down the line, have you experienced surprises? So you think you've understood how it thinks, it's worked in a certain way for a set amount of time, and then it's changed its behavior, or it's surprised you? Is that happened?
Yeah, the changing of behavior is an interesting one. So, I mean, anecdotally, I've definitely noticed when I'm, going one-on-one. So not in like let's say a production environment or like for our AI assistant tools, because the context we're generating is just so rich that it's not going to be the same as you and I would when we go to like chat.openai.com. It's just a lot of context. But yeah, anecdotally, I think you definitely see that there's something going on where it's quality. It's just missing some very basic things. I'm talking about GPT-4, and I'm talking about, like the top end model, what do you want to call it? But yeah, so we don't really see that change in quality because maybe the context is so robust, or we really boiled the problem down to a really small decision making. But what we have found, I wouldn't say surprising, but it's been an interesting journey, is to look at how we can incorporate elements of search into the results. So what we were talking about before on the software engineering use case, there's no search. Like, we have these vector DBs, and we can also talk a little bit about the mechanics, if you wish, about how to build these contexts. But if you want to incorporate elements of like information that's on the web, we've found like a little bit of a very hit or miss. So sometimes it shows these very promising results if you include like a Google search API. Yeah. But at other times it doesn't. So search is still a frontier that we don't have a really good feeling for when it works and when it doesn't work. So it's something to keep an eye on for the future. But yeah, in most cases, it's always been surprising that it's been able to do it. Especially if you have access to the 32K. I don't know if you know about the distinction between tokens.
Yeah, briefly. But for those who don't, share.
Yeah, it's essentially tokens is what these things sort of count your limit. So the amount it can take in and respond. And your token limit is both a combination of what text you give it and what you expect out of it. So I think by default, or the first model was an 8K model, so 8,000 tokens, which is roughly, I don't quite remember this, but like a page, right? A page's worth of data. And then you have, naturally, maybe it's more, don't forget that, but you also have the 32K model, which is really a lot. It's like it's a surprising amount of text you can input and output. Sometimes it's really failed on some tasks that you feel are basic. Like, you give it this, as in any company, you have these giant swaths of legacy code, where people who've left the company have written this, and it's just this whatever mammoth 2,000 line thing. And you go ask ChatGPT, it's like, okay, can you help document this? Go into the code and just line by line give us like a breakdown in plain English, and it just fails on some of those things, where I think you'd think that it should be able to gather some things about how the data is moving. So yeah, I think that it's really a matter of exploring your actual problems, and then just seeing what works. And it's really a process of iteration, and also in using your intuition about what's failing and why.
And I mean, kudos to you. You're one of the first movers. It's still it's a very big unknown about what it actually is and how it's working behind the scenes on ChatGPT's angle, for example. There's going to be people thinking, how did you get the buy-in from those above the board to be such an early mover in using these tools?
I think it's just a credit to the team at SellerX. I think that it's very much, let's do what works. And of course, there was an initial investment where you had to sink in, some developer time and energy into, finding the first few use cases where we could really see the value, but it didn't take very long to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to really double down and move forward. So I think it's really a credit to, the team at SellerX, with the CTO, we have Lars, and the CEOs, Malta and Philip. They really saw the value in it themselves and saw that you could, with a little bit of investment, it could go a long way. So, but having said that, we haven't, kicked massive goals per se. It's not like, we're 1,000 times faster or whatnot, but it's still like incremental improvements in the way we work. But like you said, I think we're so early on that I think most companies are going to head this way, one way or another, whether it's like SaaS companies that offer these tools. But I think the more likely case is that you build software which then writes software, right? Versus just writing one-off scripts.
We spoke about a bit earlier, the mundane tasks, is that the direction that it will continue to go in, or do you think it will start creeping into the creative design and that enables us to take part in even more complex work? Where do you see it?
I just think the bar for what we think is I don't know, what we think intelligent, like, I mean, I don't even know what the right word is, but like tasks for humans, it always keeps changing. Like 20 years ago, it was chess. So we thought, yeah, chess is like a thing that computers can never do. And then now they do it. And we're like, yeah, but chess wasn't it. It's Go. And then it smashes Go. It's like, okay, Go wasn't it either. And then it was program, like, no, they can't have a program. So I think we keep pushing that bar for what can't be automated. But I think at the end of the day, at least with the LLMs approach, I don't know about what happened in the future, is what you're doing is we have this term prompt engineering. Yeah. Like you're mapping some bit of text to some output. So at the end of the day, you still need to tell it what to do, and to do it in a way that is authentic or specific to what you or your company is trying to build. Because if everyone said, write me a website that sells sunglasses, we can all do that. But if we go, write me a website that sells sunglasses, but has 3 photos up here, and then they have to scroll all the way down for the last photo. So like you still have to tell it what to do. Yeah. And I think that's the direction that we'll head in, where you have to understand how these things work and be able to, in some sense, reverse engineer it. So to get what you want from it, you have to understand how it thinks, as strange as it says, or how it works. And I think with LLMs, that's always going to be true.
For the example of a prompt engineer, they're asking a question, but they kind of know what the answer should be. Will it ever get to a point where, I mean, I couldn't use ChatGPT and say, build me a website, because I don't understand the fundamentals and best practices. Someone like yourself, you could probably build a website extremely quickly because you know what needs to be done. So is that always going to be the case? We're still going to need domain knowledge to ask the right question.
Well, it's interesting because I think we've all heard stories of people who didn't know how to set up a website or create let's say a simple website, zero knowledge. Yeah. But using ChatGPT, they were able to do it. Right. And similarly, like, okay, I mean, I'm probably not the so you're saying that I could set up a website, like probably not. I'm not the world's best web engineer, but I think I would maybe know enough to go through ChatGPT and create a reasonable website. And similarly, I think there's lots of stories of programmers who, let's say, have never written, they were a Java developer. Actually, maybe that's not going to help, but something unrelated, and they wanted to write an iPhone app and they knew nothing about it. But using ChatGPT, they were able to get to the point where they released an iPhone app, more or less how they did. It might not be like the one with the most bells and whistles.
Yeah.
Something, right? So I think over time, yeah, the amount of domain knowledge you need will decrease. But compared to someone, I guess, who has domain knowledge, you're still going to be slower, right? And probably in terms of the output or the quality, the quality of the output, that'll obviously vary, and that's something that ChatGPT isn't great at. Is like as if you don't know the nitty gritty, or well, I mean, let's maybe take a step back on how these things are trained, right? They're trained on public data on the internet, and then each company has their own secret question and answer bank.
Secret sauce.
Yeah, exactly the secret sauce that no one wants to reveal. So by definition, the things that we perceive to be higher quality, higher end. I mean, not everything is quote unquote super impressive high quality, right?
Yeah.
So by definition, that's going to be super underrepresented in the data sets, right? So and the needle always moves. Like the websites today would be mind blowing. Like even the simplest websites would probably be mind blowing, whatever 20 years ago. So the bar always shifts. So as soon as ChatGPT or LLMs are doing something really easily because it's highly represented in your training data, then the person with the domain knowledge can not only leverage that to move faster, but then also bring their expertise to raise the bar, which ChatGPT can't do.
Are we just raising the whole bar, and then the base level for business, for professionals, is just there's no, for example, recruitment for dummies, books, textbooks anymore, because ChatGPT has just raised the bar, and the value add comes from on top of that with the secret sauce. Are we just shifting the base level across business?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we'll all be doing way more. There'll be a deluge, and maybe we're not experiencing it quite yet, but the amount of basic apps that I don't know, movie recommendations or whatever, no offense to anyone who has a movie recommendation app, but there was already probably hundreds, but now there'll be like millions because everyone's hello world will be a movie app with ChatGPT. So when you like want to learn a new programming language, instead of writing hello world, which maybe right, like that's the thing that you write first when you learn a new programming, now it's like IMDb filter app. So in that way, I think the bar will be raised, but it's also that we'll be doing way more. So maybe today it takes, I don't know, 10 software engineers, whatever, to run a website that has 1 million users. But I think down the line, 10 software engineers run a whole business, right? Not only the website, but customer service, right? You have agents to deal with that, automation of even, if you want to interface with a supplier which needs a PDF in a very particular format, you don't have to necessarily do that yourself. You create a framework around it that ChatGPT goes. And then you have someone that goes, yep, that looks good, final human in the loop, so nothing disastrous happens. So I think it's just that we'll be doing more and potentially just doing at the moment anyway, more of the stuff that it can't do, which is figuring out what are the problems in the real world, or what are the people problems or human-based problems of like making a team run together as a unit. That's something it can't do. So that's what we'll be focusing on. Is like, okay, so those 10 people, how can we keep them in sync as best as possible so that they can execute their vision in the most effective way?
Are we at the beginning of the end of admin? Are we going to be doing 8 hours of creative, productive work Is that the dream? Is that the dream?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, or yeah, it could be that, or that yeah, I don't know. I wonder how it's gonna go. Because um I do think to some extent you need programming experience to be able to tie these things together. So maybe I've drunk the Kool-Aid a little bit too much, but I do think probably the most important skill, even with ChatGPT, is knowing how to program. To if you want to harness, ChatGPT to its full extent, like if that is your goal. So yeah, I wonder if someone for a very specific use case, with an hour of their time, you can really automate a very specific problem that you have. And for that person, it's like, yep, had my one client, did an hour of work, and that's enough to pay the rent for the month. Like I do think with these tools, like to our earlier point about specialization. So if everyone can do the baseline to get that extra edge of expertise of domain knowledge, you get in touch with the person, and she's the best chat GPT automator of yeah, let's say this one very specific part of your pipeline. You hire her for an hour to solve the problem for you, and the thing runs yeah, as long as you want.
It's fascinating. We could go on for hours. I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna finish it with one question. People are going to be fascinated by the success you've had. And you mentioned about the backing of the board. If I may, maybe not in a position of decision making at a company, but want to start planting the seed in my company, in my team, to get the results and the productivity levels that you have been doing, where do I start?
Build a quick little MVP for something that your company does on a daily basis. So it's simply find a task that you see someone in the company or your team or a team spending a lot of time doing.
Yeah.
Could be writing code, could be something else. Once you've identified it, it's really just a matter of looking at I think there's so many resources, right? Look at prompt engineering, something to do with vector DBs, or even before that, I would just do it manually inside ChatGPT. So take some examples that that work, give it the problem, see the output, and if it's close to resembling what you wanted, I think it's just really a matter of iterating a little bit on what's there. And then once you have that, there's so many resources to figure out how you can do this at scale, so you don't have to type the thing in yourself.
Yeah.
And at any of those stages, show it to, like you said, the board or your boss, and see their reaction.
Awesome. Yeah, credit to you and all the team for being so open and sharing your experiences. I think a lot of people will be fascinated to hear your success. But that is what we all have time for. That's all we have time for today. Thank you, Ishaan, for your time and your rich insights.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, really appreciated the chat.
It's been great fun. And to the listeners, as always, drop your questions, feedback, and don't forget to like and share so we can reach as many people as possible. But it is bye from us. Thanks once again, Ishaan. Ciao for now.
Yeah.